And then coming out of COVID, disadvantaged businesses were disproportionately impacted. The current administration did issue an executive order and has lowered that threshold back down from 15 to 5.
Since you already hit the goal of 5%, you will cut all these CDBs, like disadvantaged businesses. Should I even show that I'm disadvantaged business? It is better to provide equal opportunities than try to hit the equal outcomes. I was born and bred at the post-Soviet Union, and I do know how does the equal outcome look like. And it is a shitty state to be at. You don't need to go physically to the cursed DMV just to know that, oh, you know, the electricity just went down. Yeah, we don't care. The tube just wasted 4 hours of your working day. And I'm quoting now, literally. It requires simple and unmistakable affirmation that contractors will not engage in illegal discrimination, including illegal DEI. How can I simple and unmistakably affirm anything, and what stands behind this idea of unmistakably?
The government is not good at writing objective measures. I will say that. They've gotten very lazy over the years, and they write very good subjective measures.
You tell me how you're going to measure me, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to fuck up the system. Recent executive orders, merit-based approach, changes to the small disadvantaged business benchmarks, fork in the road email.
Yeah, it's juggling. We're just juggling right now.
Right? And we are only 1 month on. Okay, yeah, that explains a lot. Okay. And we are rolling. Hello, everybody. This is Nana Talks, the second episode of this year, and I'm super pumped. I'm happy. I'm excited. Today, I have Shauna Weatherly joining me. And just to give you the context, I was following Shauna for quite long time, and I was interested in everything she were posting and talking about, because majorly your articles for me and all the posts on LinkedIn, they seemed like well, first of all, you were thinking before you were posting, and thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
And secondly, I did not recall if I mentioned that during our previous conversation. My mom, she was the engineer, like field engineer at the oil and gas company. So I grew up essentially being or spending at least half of my time at the oil rig. And
wow, okay, yeah.
yeah. So and there was that story, you know, something as always in the middle between the joke and the real life story, which were shared between engineers at the fields, you know, sitting in these tiny cabins at the rig, about the training period, how the old engineer trained the young engineer who just came out at the university, you know, with this shiny and bright eyes. So they're sitting in the cabin, in the rig, and like in the middle of their conversation, just doors slammed, you know, and open, and someone is just running into the cabin and yelling, "No pipes, no pipes." Can you imagine that? No pipes. You're an engineer, you have to solve that. And the old engineer goes like, yeah, that sounds like a huge problem, and I have no doubts that you have tons of good reasoning to share this problem with me. So do you see these 3 hooks on a wall? Can you please just take the hat and like put it at the first hook? Yeah, sure, no problem. And he runs away. 5 minutes later, all right, so we got the pipes, but diameters, they're all wrong. Everything is wrong. That's a huge problem. Yeah, I absolutely got your point. Do you mind please just put that hat, take that hat and put it on the second hook? Awesome. Thank you so much. And still sitting, doing nothing. You know, continue talking, playing chess with the young engineer. 10 minutes later, doors slammed open once again. Okay, so we figured that out, but there is no one to unload them. What are we gonna do? There is no one who can do the job. All right, yeah, that sounds like a big problem. Do you mind please just take that hat and put it to the third hook? So they put it on the third hook, and the old engineer starting to stand up like, okay, now it's time to talk. And the young engineer goes like, what the hell is going on? You've been sitting here all time long. Like, what are you talking? You see those 3 hooks? Until the problem can be on the third hook, I'm not going to do shit.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I do remember when we were talking like previously, and you mentioned that like within your years and years of experience, right, you've seen it all.
Yeah.
You've seen the pendulum swing back and forth, and there is no need to be super emotional. You just really need to try to analyze, navigate, etc. So
Right.
essentially, the main goal for this conversation is to try to at least put some ideas to the third hook, right? Not
Right.
to be super emotional, like, oh, no, no pipes. Oh, they are here, but like, we don't know what to do with them, yada, yada,
Right.
yada. Right. So, and there are tons of questions. Like, literally, the more I've tried to prepare myself for this conversation, the more questions. It's just like,
That's so funny.
appearing, and like, honestly, I even don't know where to start. Like, the recent executive orders, merit
Yeah.
based approach, changes to the small disadvantaged business benchmarks, fork in the road email,
Yeah. Right.
uh, you name it, right? So
It's
everything,
juggling. We're just juggling right now.
right? And it's
Yeah.
and we are only 1 month on.
Yeah.
God. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but I've decided to start, from the emotional question.
Sure. Sure. Why
And
not?
right,
Yeah.
so let's start from the why do you love being the government consultant. What do you
Oh,
love in this job?
well, it's sort of weird because I don't think people see this line in the government, procurement and buying and stuff like that as creative. But I see it as creative. I see it as problem solving and navigating complex issues and kind of putting together puzzles of how to get things accomplished. Because the goal is never to say, no, we can't do it that way. The goal is to, if we need something for the government, try to find a way to get it. And it's learning how to navigate kind of through those policies and through the processes and experiences and all the conversations I've had over my career, just sitting in a cubicle listening to somebody else have a problem that maybe I'm having now, that kind of led me to really enjoy this, enjoy the problem solving aspect, enjoy the analysis piece of this, and through that maybe finding new ways to buy, procure, streamline processes, and help contractors figure out how to navigate all that at the same time. Right, that's what I'm doing now. When I was in, I just like the analysis and streamlining and figuring out how to buy, but now it's helping people on the outside understand that there are those avenues, and it's not, just a yes you can, no you can't all of the time. It is sometimes, but not all of the time. So I think that's what I really like about it. That's the passion behind it, and then helping small businesses kind of understand the complexity is there, but it can be boiled down to like step by step things that you can do to, be part of the marketplace if you're interested. So
Yeah, and like, it's really interesting, to look at everything from this perspective, that you have to be creative in order to get into the government contracting.
sometimes, yes, yeah,
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 because I do know, like, firsthand it, after I'm talking to a lot of military spouses, veterans, or even folks who are currently in active duty, and they're preparing, to for this transition to civilian life. This, hey, every one of them, everyone has this idea that, what, I'm gonna go to the SBA, I'm gonna obtain this certificate, and I'm gonna start to securing my access to like millions of dollars.
yeah,
And especially, having in mind all the data which are being published and every day more and more and more at X, right? And all you
right,
say, like, oh, 45 millions over there, 100 million, so, like, signed to this company, and you're like,
yeah.
okay. And all of these millions and millions, they've been treated as like, well, that's small amount, and like, huh, if 45 millions for you is small amount, so like, big gonna be how much?
Right,
Right,
yeah.
so you're starting to build this idea that if I will be able to get in, and my way is like, clear, I'm gonna get this. Step one, obtain certificate. Step two, get contract. And then step three, become rich.
Get
Right. And
rich, yeah.
yeah, and nothing in the middle, right? It's just like
There's a lot in the middle. There is so much in the middle. Yeah. Yeah.
and it never been easy, right? But
No.
now it feels like it's even getting more complex, to be
Hmm.
honest, right?
Yeah.
Even with this whole ideas of like let's make it easier. But it feels like it's turning into more complex. For
Hmm.
example, the SDB, right? Small disadvantaged businesses. I've seen this post in on your LinkedIn profile and tons of other folks talking about that they've changed
Right.
benchmarks, right? And I've seen it seems to me that all of the opinions. I believe that you were on a side that that's okay. They've just revisited the benchmark. They've lowered a little bit the benchmark, but that's all right. So, why do you think that that's all right? That that's not a problem, and like that? Yeah, I mean, we will
Well,
get there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the thing people have to understand is what's happened is that the government was exceeding the statutory 5% in the SDB land for many, many years, over a decade. And what the government had done recently under the last administration was ask federal agencies to push further. Okay, you've met, the statutory threshold is 5%. You've been meeting 9%, 10%, even 11% at times. Some agencies far exceed that, but overall, for the government, that threshold, let's see if you can stretch to 12. Can you stretch to 13? And then coming out of COVID, those disadvantaged businesses were disproportionately impacted from COVID. And so there was a push even higher into like the 15% range, which is where we were sitting at the beginning of FY 2025. So the current administration did issue an executive order and has lowered that threshold back down from 15 to 5. It's not gotten rid of the program. It's just lowered the threshold back down to 5%. Since we were already exceeding it for over a decade, I think that, there's not um, horrible outcome that will come from this because SDBs are one of the easiest ways, especially through the 8A program itself, the 8A federal, the program development program there is one of the best ways to get work done quickly. You can sole source to those companies, you can negotiate directly with those companies, you don't have to advertise to the public and have a 30-day waiting period, a lot of those things. So I don't see that use changing of that program. Actually, I've had some 8As come to me and say, well, I'm afraid to say I'm an 8A now because, they lowered this goal. And what does that mean? That maybe they don't like me anymore. And I'm like, no, 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 no. You need to still let people know who you are. You don't lead with that. You never lead with your certifications, right? You always lead with your skills and what you can bring to the table. But knowing that you are an 8A or you're a small disadvantaged business is like the icing on the cake, right? For contracting officers, like, oh, you've got these great skills and I can get to you this way. That's fantastic. So while I'm disappointed that decrease occurred because it doesn't make the government push to give more to SDBs. I do think that we're going to see still those companies used in a very healthy way because they were for a decade up to that. So and I think that can continue and it's again it's going out there and marketing and making yourself known is part of it. Just being known that you're there and you exist as part of that market research is really important. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I'm hoping it doesn't decrease things, but I think I feel pretty positive that it'll be okay for a while, for sure.
Yeah. So, but let me ask you a complex question here.
Sure.
So, the fear I do have, and also I've seen this, some again some thoughts echoing mine, that this decrease at the benchmarks might create the perverse incentive when, especially when we're talking about merit based approach, right? So let's imagine that we have some
Yes.
checklist. Now you have to fulfill it, and you have, let's imagine, right, 20 winners out of couple of thousands, and all of them are more or less equal. But since you already hit the goal of 5%, you will cut all these CDBs, like disadvantaged businesses, because you've already hit the goal. So you won't take a look at them. And that I would imagine, like where these businesses are coming from when they're asking, should I even show that I'm disadvantaged business, to make sure that I will not cut off because they've already hit the goal.
Right. And just from my experience as being a contracting officer for, decades, I never approached the view of when I was looking at market research as, well, we've already hit 10% or we've already hit 5%. I don't need to go to a women owned business or a service disabled veteran or a SDB because the market research shows I should. To avoid going to a market or a pool that your research shows, you have to document quite thoroughly as to why you're not going there. You have to prove it, that they cannot meet the capabilities. You can't do that without having, RFI information. That's why the government will sometimes request, these requests for information is, to help them solidify yes or no, there are adequate businesses that are eligible and could propose at a fair and reasonable price. And that's why they feel like little mini proposals when you write them up, right? Is so that the government gets that warm, fuzzy feeling when they go. And there are some schools of thought that, like, okay, if we award this piece to a small business, then we can award this piece to a large business. The government does have to take into consideration, risks of going with new businesses who maybe don't have experience with the government yet, or maybe don't have experience as a subcontractor with the government yet before they give them prime contracts. But that's a risk-based, approach that all comes into looking at the proposals and things like that. But I can assure people, nobody ever, at least that I've worked with or in my offices, has ever, looked at a market research and said, well, we hit the 5%, so we don't need to give any more women owned, we don't need to put any more women owned set asides out or any more SDB set asides out. I've never seen that approach happen. I could see why people would fear that. But these are floors, they're not ceilings. So we have several, if you go out and look at the SBA goals for agencies, who've the scorecard, excuse me, over the years, several agencies have exceeded these goals, 20%, 30% that they've given to these types of companies. So I think, if you can look at that and then you can see who is small business friendly, I like to say small business friendly, you can target some of those agencies because you know that they tend to go that direction if they're buying what you're selling.
Yeah, absolutely. But when we were talking about disabled businesses, from my understanding, when I've done my research, it felt like at least once at 5 years, the list of who
Yeah,
are treated as the disadvantaged businesses,
right.
changing, it swings back and forth again. And I honestly, I do not fully understand how this specific list of all the businesses who may be treated as the disadvantaged business are created, and how would you know whether you are disadvantaged business or not. So again, taking into account military spouses, right? From my perspective, like, regular mortal, just common human being, right? They're
Yeah,
disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged,
right.
and marginalized group in a way, right?
Right,
Comparing to any other small
right.
business owners, but they still are not recognized as the disadvantaged group. So, how these lists are being created?
Well, the disadvantaged portion is usually, depending on if we're talking socially disadvantaged or economically disadvantaged. So there's two pieces of disadvantage that get looked at. When we're talking about 8A and SDBs, it's social disadvantage and economically. When we're talking about women, like some military spouses, like myself, woman-owned business, it's economically disadvantaged. So it's that you don't have certain assets over a certain threshold. Those are all established through law and policy by SBA, and those are part of the Code of Federal Regulations 13 CFR, which is where everything sits for small business eligibility. So yeah, I mean it seems that people should be, but if you don't meet certain criteria or you can't produce the documentation to prove it as part of the certification process, then that's a little difficult. I tell people always to make sure they understand what those definitions are before they start down the path, because it can be very discouraging if you start down a path of a certification and then you realized halfway through that you assumed that you had a certain preference or a certain advantage disadvantage during the application process, and that you don't meet it because you can't produce a certain document, or you can't um, you know provide an example of a social disadvantage situation where you've experienced that in your life. And that can be difficult, and sometimes it's very painful too for people to have to um, relive these experiences. I mean, if you've struggled financially and you don't make certain amount of money and you've had issues where you've lost a business or you've had economic hardship, it can be very difficult to revisit that. Same with the social disadvantage issues, where if you've faced discrimination or things like that in education or in your youth or in your employment, it's very difficult for people to revisit those. So I think just kind of understanding what those disadvantage, I hate to say it, bars are, that the government has set up for these programs is important, so that you don't um, experience further disappointment in trying to achieve that.
Yeah, honestly, I did not even like the wording disadvantage
Yeah,
because it's
it's
like
it
like a
it's an
disease,
uncomfortable word. Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's like there's something wrong. It's not that there's
Yeah, that
anything
that was
wrong.
just my life. Come
Yeah,
on.
yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, and that's what I tell people is, people feel uncomfortable sometimes, reiterating some of these things they've lived through in their life. If they've, had a problem on a job that was, some sort of thing that barred them from being promoted or something like that, is yes, it's uncomfortable because you have to name names and you have to name places and you have to name dates and you have to do all that. The burden of that is difficult, but it doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your business, anything wrong with your life. It doesn't mean that you're a bad business person, or that if you've struggled in business. None of that means that. So I think, yeah, disadvantage is a poor choice of word. I hope we can someday come up with a better term for that and a better way to describe it.
Right. But like the next question for me, to be totally honest, when I was starting to think about that topic, around the disadvantaged business, was like, okay, so I need to put essentially all my dirty laundry and very personal, in many cases, right,
Yeah,
story up front of some officer, procurement officer I do not even know. That's, no name person
right,
behind the request for additional information in many cases, to got what? I mean, for me, it is
right.
still, I do not fully understand, and I'm a huge, uh, profounder of the idea that it is better to provide equal opportunities than try to hit the equal outcomes.
Right.
Simply because I'm originated, I was
Yeah,
born and bred at the post-Soviet Union, and and I do know how does the equal outcome look like, and it is
right.
a shitty state to
Yeah.
be at. So I still did not fully understand, especially when we were talking about small businesses, how the SBA per se are helping to equalize opportunities for all the businesses.
Yeah, the only thing in in the realm of the certifications, I mean, SBA does a lot of things. So it has loans for small businesses, gives access to loans and capital and things like that. There's training opportunities there. But when it comes to procurement, really all the certification gives you is the opportunity to go after a subset of procurement that may be set aside for this pool of applicants. It doesn't necessarily give you
So that's
um,
equal outcome, rather, in a
yeah,
way.
it's more like equal outcome. Yeah, exactly. So, but it doesn't preclude you from going after any opportunity, right? I mean, the opportunity itself may preclude you because of business size or the dollar value or whatever, the type of work, but it doesn't preclude you from putting it together a team that could do that work, a team of other small businesses, a teaming with a large business, that has always been there. It's the set asides where the SBA is has tried to say, government, we need to select a subset of the work that we're doing and let small businesses have that so that they can grow in terms of being suppliers for us in the future, kind of help. That's why they're called federal contracting assistance programs. They're to kind of help build that experience level to branch into the larger contracts. Over time, the expectation is small businesses will hopefully grow into large businesses, right? And then they can compete on those other opportunities, and that these programs are kind of like the kind of like the AAA ball club, for the major leagues, right? This
Mm.
is kind of where you start. and get that experience before, you move into the big leagues. It doesn't always work that way. There's plenty of small businesses that have gone straight into, other contracting, either as a sub or a prime, and been very successful. Um, and some businesses that just stay at very low dollar values because they want to have just repeated work that is more routine at lower dollar values. Low dollar values I'm talking about are things I wouldn't balk at. $250,000 and less. I mean, that's, for most people that's a small business, that's a huge win.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and so you could get, orders that are $50,000 each. And if you get 5, 10, 15, 20 of those a year, you're doing pretty well. And you can have a very successful small business even at the low end of the scale in federal procurement. I think people are sold a lot on the higher end and don't realize that there is a lot of really good entry points at the lower end that are just, things that small businesses normally do, right? The smaller types of services that small businesses perform.
So yeah, crawl before you run, right? In a way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I always tell people it's good to have a couple of entry points, maybe, getting to know people, and say you'll take purchase card buys, for example, little buys under $10,000, and accept those credit card buys, and then work your way up into the larger 10,000, 15, 50, $250,000 buys that grow your business, help you, create some capital so that you can then expand and you can grow, and then you can team with maybe larger companies, bigger contracts, go out on those for yourself, etc. So yeah, it's kind of an evolving marketplace where businesses need to think about not only what they want to do, but what the market will gives them the best entry points to do to help them grow.
Right, absolutely. And I do remember during the previous week, again, preparing to our conversation, I found myself in a very interesting position when everybody was like following, the hearing of the like Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and all of that. And I was like one of those crazy 2,400, I believe, listeners. Just think about that. 33 millions of small businesses, and a little bit more than 2,000 of them were listening to the confirmation hearing of the Kelly
Right.
Loeffler, right?
Yeah.
Who has very significant chance to become our next administrator of the
Oh
Small
yeah.
Business
Hmm.
Administration, right?
Yeah.
And for me, it was very interesting to hear her thoughts around all of these questions, even though I haven't heard that anyone asked about this specific topic like disadvantaged businesses. But what I liked was the idea that at least she claimed that she gonna push a lot the idea of the field offices, get back to the offices, be there and help people on the ground.
Hmm.
And it seems to me, that no matter how perfect might be overall system at the federal level, if the field offices who does know, their people, community,
Right.
because like rural business and I don't know, typical urban business, and they're going to be different business
Hmm.
in Nevada and different parts of
Right.
it, right? And California, they're different
Right.
communities, even set of mind, right? They're different. So it
Hmm.
is very important to help and emphasize that we will build and support field offices. And I really like that.
I do too. I think that's great because the procurement center representatives in those local areas do know what their federal agencies in their area buy, what they're looking for, who the large businesses are that these small businesses can team with. They understand what the pricing situation is in that area. So, what are good prices for the work that you're trying to do in that area? They have all of that, and they have. I think they're just an underutilized resource and have been, just because, like you said, I think when they're not um, somewhere where you can walk in and get to them. I know under COVID we couldn't do that, but now you can, and they need to be accessible, and they need to be available to kind of help be that advocate and guidance, along with some of the others like Apex accelerators and things like that. They review the government's procurement actions as they're going through for purchase. The PCRs, the SBA local procurement center representatives, have a say and they are coordinated with on the largest actions that come through, and they have to give their, concurrence on those. And if they don't agree, it's because they've met some contractors that, through the local area, and they say, hey, I had 3 small businesses walk in last week that said they can do this work. I don't understand why we're going to a large business. They can be more of your advocate. So I'm happy to hear that that's going to happen. I really, really hope it does.
Yeah, but also I really hope that they will add that automatization, and tooling
Yeah.
for the sake of transparency and speed up the processes. And again,
Yes.
uh, I don't know how everything looked like in the United States, but living over here for almost 3 years already, and I've spent some time at DMV. I can say you that in many cases, it might sound weird, but Ukrainian official structures working better.
Oh, I don't think that sounds weird. Yeah.
Like you can literally in Ukraine, you can go to the application mobile app, fulfill all the documents, wait 2 days, and receive everything back to you. You don't
Hmm.
need to go physically to the cursed DMV, stay in the waiting line, spend over there 4 hours just to know
Right.
that, oh, the electricity just went down. Yeah, bye. And yeah, we don't care that you just wasted 4 hours of your working day.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm still furious about that.
No, I
I
totally
I
get it.
wasted, and so and when I'm thinking about the field offices, anyhow connected to the bureaucracy and etc., I'm thinking about people on very small wages who are suffering rather they want to help, and every day is the bad day, or just this day, another day, etc. That's on one hand, and on the other hand is I again getting back to the Ukrainian and when I was just a little child, because I know that folks are doing their best to change that.
Yeah.
The only way to get into the government contracting, especially from the field office, was to make sure that the field office officer knows you personally. Because
Hmm.
the city was so tiny that it, even at that time, that was very hard to find on a map. Nowadays, even harder.
Hmm.
And the problem with the field offices was always that you cannot enter, the system if your father, mother, any family member haven't been there, because every time procurement officer will think about small business, they're going to think about small businesses they do know.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know like how this might be navigated. And again, this question hasn't been asked. And I was like, I do remember that I was sitting over this hearing and I was like, can I please, 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 I have a couple of questions. So yeah, that's I really hope that at some moment of a time, just the people will be able to ask questions, not the
Yeah.
official representatives, because they're everybody asking important questions, but covered with their agenda in a way. I'm not saying that they're doing,
Right. Oh,
their
yeah,
job
yeah.
poorly.
They're politicians. That's part of that, right? It's they always have an agenda, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
it
How do you
doesn't
know that
matter.
politicians lie, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, that's why they're politicians. But I mean, what I think is that, SBA has an opportunity now to leverage um, all sorts of new innovative tools, AI, things like you're talking about, apps, all sorts of areas where things could be streamlined, things could be better. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know SBA just went through the new update of the My SBA certification portal. Everybody said it's great because instead of 4 separate portals, you have one. I've helped people get through this one portal. It is still nightmarish in many ways to get through this single portal. It is slightly better than before, but I think it all comes down to management, right? And some of that, and under being willing to understand the pain points of the people you're trying to serve. Right. I think that is where some of this has been lacking is the government is very good over my 35 and a half years. I've noticed the government is very good at telling the people what they think they need to know, not always listening to people to get and understand where people's pain points are and then solving to those pain points. I've seen that every agency I've worked at, and it has been probably the most frustrating part of being a federal career servant is not having the ability to help make some of those changes and increase some of that and make that better. So that's why I'm kind of out here now is trying to help people. It's like, what is your pain point? How can I answer your question? But I think there's some real opportunity in the fact that we might be able to see some of these things streamline. Sometimes you have to break things to fix them. Sometimes you can fix things where they're at. I'm not sure what the right answers are in all of this. I'm going to be very interested in following it, but I think there's a lot of opportunity here where things could be streamlined and better for people in terms of getting information, getting entry points, finding ways through the certification maze that are easier than what it is now.
Oh, yeah,
So,
absolutely. All right, so let me leverage your 35 and a half years.
ah,
And I mean, I honestly need, like, someone who will help me to translate from the official language to a normal human being language,
sure.
the one of the executive orders. And the executive order I'm talking about is the how the president Donald J. Trump protects civil rights and merit-based opportunity by ending illegal DEI.
Yeah.
So uh, I mean, this whole executive order for me was a little bit hard to figure out. Well, first of all, I'm not the brightest person in the room. And secondly,
Oh
I do
no.
not talk politicians. So I cannot say something on politicians. So for me, it was very hard. But like, where I talked the most was this idea. Uh, First of all, of the revoking of executive order contracting criteria mandating affirmative action, and I'm talking
Yes.
about executive order signed by LBJ, and that was like 40 years ago, right?
Yeah,
And
like
1960.
1964, 65. Yeah.
65, yeah.
Hmm.
But like, other than that, what like was very weird for me, that was this specific sentence. It requires simple and unmistakable, and I'm quoting now literally, right? It requires simple and unmistakable affirmation that contractors will not engage in illegal discrimination, including illegal DEI. So
Yeah.
my question going to be, first of all, how
Yeah.
can I simple and unmistakably affirm anything, and what stands behind this idea of unmistakably? Secondly, what stands behind illegal DEI actions?
Okay, that's a loaded question, but I will
Only
try to
two. Come
answer it.
on, only
I will
two.
try to answer it. Yeah, so DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? That is being, my understanding, interpreted as anything that divides the population into segments or subsegments and groups. So if you look at it from a perspective of procurement, which is my lens, that is and has been and could be interpreted as um, saying that we have contractors that are minority owned, veteran owned, women owned, service disabled veteran owned, hub zone small businesses. The administration has taken or appears to be taking a broad interpretation of DEI to include that just the simple identification of businesses in separate subcategories is divisive, and therefore seeing that as possibly divisive takes on procurement. That we've seen some challenges in the last 2 years to the 8A, social disadvantaged statements. We've seen some other challenges in the courts. They've all, at least one, the 8A has been upheld, but I think that there is kind of this sweeping interpretation that is starting to take hold, and I haven't seen how far it's going to go yet. But I do know that a lot of the cases that came through that I worked on for the federal acquisition regulation in my last 18 months as a Fed, and some of the SBA policies that went through in the last 4 years have been pulled back for review to see if they are considered by the administration as a DEI like or DEI advocating or DEI rule that the administration wants to rescind. Um, I don't know that I agree with taking that broad interpretation of DEI. I think there are different things that DEI does depending on if you're managing it as part of your workforce versus managing it in contracts. And I have seen some statements that they want to remove DEI provisions from contracts. I don't even know what that is, quite frankly. I don't know what a DEI provision in a contract is at this point. The two closest things I could think of that even remotely run on the scale of what they're interpreting DEI to be would be the FAR 52219-1 clause, which, or provision, excuse me, which is where businesses identify if they have any uh, minority ownership, veteran ownership, women owned ownership, et cetera. And then the subcontracting requirements for government, where large businesses are required to subcontract certain amounts of work that they plan to subcontract to small businesses. And I want people to understand that large businesses have never been required to subcontract anything. It's of what they choose to subcontract that portion of the work is then supposed to go certain percentages to these programs, which are those statutory things we talked about, the thresholds, the floors. And so those are the only two DEI like type of terms I can think of. And I've been a contracting officer for a long time. I've never had anybody bring me anything that was under the guise of DEI to try and, I think the EEO talks, or the EO talks to imprecise language and coded language type terms that people may have included DEI things in contracts. I have never had anybody bring anything like that to me. I don't even know what it would look like, frankly.
Hmm.
So that's where I'm seeing this DEI stretching into the procurement area, and I don't have all the crystal ball on it. I'm still watching to see how far it's going to stretch, and I think we'll know more as SBA kind of comes back online with new leadership. I think we're going to know more. We're seeing USAID, a lot of their grants and things like that be lumped into the DEI realm, rightly or wrongly. I can't tell you because I don't know those grants programs well enough to understand those in detail, but I just think that we could see DEI, or the guise of DEI, stretch quite broadly across government. And what that means for small businesses, I'm not sure.
Right. That's like I do understand in a way the logic behind of the essentially reverse discrimination in a way, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that's applicable in all the cases and if this, aggressive pushback will help to I don't know, to gather country together, or we will just, continue splitting it more and more and more.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what people need to understand is, like, for example, I've heard people talk about, now under DEI, there's no Black History Month celebrations, there's no Women's History Month celebrations, things like that. The Defense Intelligence Agency issued a memo to their employees saying that those celebrations are no longer going to happen in their workforce. I personally, having sat through many of those celebrations and speakers that are brought in for those things, they're not a day off. They're nothing more than, we all just get the federal holiday off if there's a holiday associated with anything. But it's really was a chance to learn more about each other and find where our commonalities were versus where our differences were. And I just feel that not having those, it doesn't prevent people from celebrating those. It's just not the workplace is just not going to promote that anymore, that celebration anymore. I think as a society we're still seeing people celebrate, like Black History Month and Women's History Month and things like that, and that's fine. I just think, like you said, it could add to some divisiveness versus, the inclusion that what the administration says they're trying to achieve.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So, merit based approach. On a surface, I like this idea. Like for me, as for the former engineer, everything connected to the data and numbers, it's like my whole bread and butter. Okay, I
yeah.
can I can deal with that. But as soon as you're trying to dig a little bit deeper than just going, through the surface, okay, merit based approach, awesome. What are the checklist benchmarks? How
Right.
you will compare me to anyone else, and how can I see that you've done this comparison? And oh, I've like I lose it. So what do you mean? Like when we were talking about, I don't know, SAT, right? We had the more or less, and we do have more or less the same system in Ukraine, and there is open lists of all the student applicants
Hmm.
and their scores, was the detailed explanation of the scoring behind, plus some additional scores because of the, I don't know, public work you've done or something like that. So your score, how this score has been created.
Hmm.
And if you were not able to get into this university because the other folks were able make that happen, you're like, well, yeah, heck yeah, this, like, I do understand that. Because, like,
Yeah.
here was the line: they were able to accept 40 of us, like 600 applied, and like, so here's the line, and I'm
Right.
just below it, and that's it.
Right.
And even though in that case, I do remember we had this scenario when the highest score you were able to hit was 160,
Hmm.
and there was 15 of us who hit it the score 159. And there was like, okay, so, and I do remember how we were standing right up front this like printed document, and we were like, okay, so how are they gonna pick?
Yeah.
Because there are like 50 of us and we're all, well, pretty cool. So how
Yeah.
are they gonna pick 40?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and that's my question. So merit based approach, in my at least idea, is supposed to look like that, right? When you do understand the scoring system, it is
Yes.
super transparent. You do understand all the other players, like, in the game. You do understand the, again, how the score has been created. But that's only the first layer or the first question, right? And they're going to be the second one, the corner case. If
Right.
20 of us are perfect from all the scoring perspective, but you need to choose only two,
Right.
how are you gonna make it happen? So
How are you going to
I'm
make it
really
happen?
interesting, on, like, in your take on that, from both perspectives, from the ideal perspective, like if we're gonna imagine ourselves 5 years from now and everything works perfectly, how it might be, and from the perspective of the local SBA procurement officer,
Right.
right? Who, and let's be honest, you can have tons of documents and all of that, but at the end of the day, you're a human being. So you're
Right.
going to make the decision sometimes based on your gut feeling, interview, knowing something in person, word of mouth, etc., etc. And I cannot imagine that at any point of a time we will be able to get rid of that, because
Right.
that means to turn us into robots, and no, that's
Right.
not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody needs to understand that subjectivity is there, whether it's, scored, not scored, you have right now we have procurements that are best value where it's, it's adjective ratings, right? And that scale is very wonky, it moves and shifts all the time. And even when we had scores, when we used to use scoring in, there's self scoring now that people do, but we used to use scoring a long time ago. And, that's where a lot of protests happened because we had scores that were either identical scores and one person got the award and one person didn't, or
Hmm.
we had scores that were 1 point apart. And it was like, so what was the 1 point difference? Can
Right.
you identify why that was 1 point different? And
Hmm.
so then the government thought they were getting smart and they thought, oh, well, instead of making it a scale of like 1 to 100, we'll make it 1 to 500. And that way, that 1 point is actually looks like 5 points. And then, okay, that looks a little bigger. So maybe people won't protest and they won't see that. I mean, that actually happened. And then they went into the adjective ratings, which is where they could say, oh, well, an excellent is this, and then it was very subjective, and things like this. So it's kind of now that it's evolving back to points, I think it's going to get messy again for a while. And how messy that is, I think, is going to be dependent on how well that scoring is laid out, right? What equals a score or a point, or a certain set of scores, and what the bar is. And I think there's going to be a lot of difficulty as we shake through that process, going back to kind of this drilled down level. The government is not good at writing objective measures. I will say that they've gotten very lazy over the years, and they write very good subjective measures that give them lots of wiggle room to move around and come up with an opinion and have a reason why this or that. They are horrible at writing objective measures, horrible at stating a fact you must meet, and here's what you get when you do. They're really, really bad at it.
But on the other hand, in the engineering world, sorry, there was this like joke or idea. You tell me how you're gonna measure me, and I'm gonna tell you how I'm gonna fuck up the system. So I mean,
Yeah,
how this, just to give you the context, right, where this joke came up, or was brought by, when folks, a lot of companies were trying to figure out how to add the KPIs on top of the developers' heads, and they were like, okay, lines of code, and developers
yeah,
like, heck yeah. Lines of code, you don't care whether it's going to work or not, how sophisticated it's going to be. You need lines
yeah,
of code. There you got it. Now
yeah,
we're talking about, okay, you have to like make it clean, and you need to make it like fast. No problem. It's clean, it's fast, still not working though, but clean and fast.
right,
So
right,
every
yeah.
time
So you
someone
get some
is
points.
right, every time, again, tell me how you're going to measure me and score me, and I'm going to tell you,
Right, right. And that's the thing. And that's it's I used to work with people on in two areas of, merit-based work. Like, one, writing these criteria for contractors that we want to hire, and two, writing these criteria for employees in the government for their own personal performance. And, there's merit-based approaches in both of those. And it's very difficult to drill it down to what is the most important. And what I tell everybody is, you need to score the most important thing. And what is that? What are you trying to get to? What's your bottom line? And then work back from your bottom line. Okay, then I also want, it needs to have this. It has to be this, and then it also needs to have X, Y, Z, and work back. And so that's where we tried to build it. I think again, it's going to be kind of a, I hate to say it, kind of a sloppy situation for a while, as the government works through how they're going to, write and implement those things. And like you said, if there's six of you who have a score, what are we, flipping a coin? I mean, what are we doing, right? I mean, there needs to be like tiebreaker criteria or some sort of other criteria, risk criteria, or is it, does it come down to this person got the last award, so this person gets the next award? Is it rotating source type of situation? I don't know.
in
I don't
our
know what those
case, that
answers
was
are.
alphabetic order.
Yeah,
And
it
I
could be,
was
it could
lucky
be,
enough that I'm Gottlieb.
yeah, there you go. So see, it could come down to something that just is as simple as that, right? So it's I don't know how they're going to do it. I think it could get very creative as to how people do it. And whether those creative solutions seem fair, I think is going to be the real test, as to what they think they try, and the how the outcomes turn out there. um I'm curious. That's why I'm still, in watch and wait mode. I have ideas. I don't know that my ideas are the best ideas necessarily, but I think there's ways that you can make that happen and still be fair in some sense of the matter. So,
Mm. Yeah, well,
yeah.
I'm not sure if fair is even applicable, for this situation.
Yeah, yeah, that fair's probably a bad choice of words.
Because as they say, there is no like fair way to chop the chicken's head off,
There
right?
you go. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to come down to really just, again, they have to they have to tell you what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. And again, I say the government's not good at writing these things, and they're not good at thinking ahead. Like, the government is not good at thinking, oh, well, we're going to write this out and we're going to have one winner. No, they're not. Most of them are not going to sit there and go, but what if we have 10? What if we have six people that tie? What do we do? Then what do we do? I've noticed, at least in my time in government, that some offices are really good at thinking ahead, and trying to strategize going forward beyond the moment at hand. And some just aren't as good at it. So,
Yeah, well, once again, we are human beings, right?
yeah,
But I would imagine
exactly.
that, uh, again, from my even personal perspective, bringing a lot of transparency into system helped a lot to, decrease the amount of anxiety and fear and all of
Yeah,
that. Because I do understand, okay, so that was the scoring system, and here we are, right? We've
right.
scored the same. Yes, we had questions. We were like, okay, what's gonna happen now? But we we understood, staying, right next to this board, that you and me and everyone, we're exactly the same,
Right. Yeah.
right? And maybe we can partner up. I don't know, maybe we can bring up something together or whatsoever. But now we do understand, first of all, that yes, we've been measured and scored, uh like all of us, according to the same system, right? We do understand the system behind. And, like, yes, it's a messy situation we are in, but
Yeah. And I think, that transparency, the other part of that, if we don't have it is going to be difficult is, businesses, especially when it comes to like determining contractors and awards, businesses need to know before they submit a proposal whether or not they have a good chance of winning, not after, right? And it's real important because it costs money to
absolutely,
put
and
these
time and
proposals together, and
everything.
time and effort, and it's better to know up front what you're going to be scored against, how well, what those tiebreakers would be, all those things, so you understand if this is something that you really want to, expend this cost to do,
And
and
how big
or
is the
team.
competition, right? if
Yeah,
if for one,
exactly.
like, I don't know, contract there have been already, and the government gonna hire two companies and 2,000 already has applied, am I willing to become 2,000 first? Or
Hmm.
maybe I'm gonna look for the similar contract, maybe 10K lower, but I'm gonna be the second,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
you need to also understand how big is the pipeline and how
Right.
big is the, like, again, if the pipeline, even if they're gonna pick 2,000, like, there are 2,000 candidates, but they're gonna pick 1,000, you're at 50% chances.
Right. And that's why it's so important as a small business, I think. I always tell people, yeah, 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 you can get registered in SAM. Yeah, 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 you can get your certification. But if you aren't looking at the market so that you know who that competition pool might possibly be for that, and you're not looking at who's won the awards in the past, who's out there now in the DSBS that has your same NAICS code and does what you do using keywords, if you haven't looked at the past, awards that have happened over the last 5 to 10 years for the same work, with that agency, with other agencies. If you're not aware of that landscape, you're not going in with your eyes open. And that's really important. That first piece of just knowing what that landscape looks like for what you want to bring to the government is so important, because I've seen people pivot once they realize that maybe the area that they're trying to go into is saturated, and that only certain contractors are winning those awards at certain dollar values, and there's not much deviation. I think it's really important to understand that, what you maybe want to sell to the government may not be what the government may need to buy from you. There are other, you really need to pick apart your business and decide what you can sell, what you should sell, and what the government buys out of all that, because what you think you're going to sell may not be what you end up selling at all. And I've seen small businesses, including ones I've worked with, who've come into my office and say, "Hey, I'm here to do environmental cleanup." Like, I've had an 8A that came into my office one time, and they came in over and over and over. We're interested in environmental cleanup work. They were new to the 8A program, and I just didn't have anything I could give to them as under the program that was small enough that fit the 8A program. And one day, this 8A was sitting in my office, and my estimator came in, my cost estimator, and he dropped a bunch of estimates on my desk and said, "I'm really sorry. I lost some employees. I'm behind to get these estimates to you." And this environmental group that wanted to do cleanup turned on a dime in that moment and said, "We can help you with estimating, And he said, "Really? Oh, yeah, we'd be happy to help you with estimating." And I looked at him and he looked at me and I said, "Do you have money to pay for them as estimators?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Do you think we can offer SBA a small contract with them to get you some help through end of fiscal year?" Yes, we did it. We did it within like 15 days. This company that did not plan to market to be estimating support got their first contract doing estimating support, and now they're doing environmental cleanup 20 years later, and making over 20 million a year with the government. So it might be a case of what can you do versus what you want to do to get in and get started. So
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, let's get back for a second to this idea of the SBA officers who will get back to the office, and the like Senator Kelly Loeffler made the very very strict point that they will demand all the SBA officers get back to the office buildings.
yeah.
And at the same time, there is that expectation that there are going to be decrease in the workforce because of this demand, that up to
Yes.
10% of the people might essentially decide that they are not willing to continue
Hmm.
building their career within the government structures. Let's put it
Right.
that way, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
also, there was this email, fork on the road email.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my way to bring it up. Right?
We have
uh,
another name for that email in my house, but
yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second. So essentially, and correct me here if I got something wrong, but what they are saying is, so we're gonna pay for you, like we're gonna pay you 8 months, essentially, like I don't know, clearance or whatsoever, and you can leave right here, right now,
yeah.
and just choose, and that's it.
Yeah. You have until the 6th, is my understanding of February. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot
So
that
now,
as
hold on. What is the
go
name
ahead.
of
I know
this?
you've got tons of questions. Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
no, no. That's not about it. So, what is the name of the email at your home?
The fork you email.
Okay, yeah, that explains a lot. Okay. All right, so for Q email.
Yeah, I hate to say it that way, and I hate to laugh about it, but in all things you must find humor, I find. So, um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
So for Q email.
yeah, yeah. The email concerned me from the sense of being a former supervisor and director in chief, and a federal employee who started out in HR, quite frankly, and just kind of have been an HR enthusiast, I guess, over the years. I've kept up with the rules because I had to as a supervisor and things like that. But it concerned me because there was no written offer that anybody was given. There's a lot of FAQs on the website that they will point you to and say, well, go over here and look at the FAQs, but they're changing daily. And, those mean nothing. Those FAQs mean nothing. They're there for information only. They're actually not the written offer. And federal employees have a unique status that a lot of people in the workforce do not have. They have certain protections that people do not have in terms of their employment from being fired. And that is there on purpose to make sure that we don't have somebody come in and install loyalists to a certain um, you know ideology that is not for the public good. That's why careerists are there. They're supposed to be. We were apolitical. I have never told anybody what my political leanings are. Those conversations don't come up in the office. There's fines and all sorts of things if employees, participate in certain political functions or things like that. We all know those rules as a federal employee. So the federal workforce is apolitical, meaning they don't take a side. They've worked under all sorts of administrations, under all the different parties, and we do the job. That's just what you're there to do, and that's what I'm hearing from the workforce. They will continue to do the job. They will report to duty if they need to, if they're not near retirement or this is not a good deal for them. But some of the concerns out of that email is, one, we are under a continuing resolution. We only have budget until middle of March, and there is no power of the purse with entities outside the House of Representatives to commit the government to making payments for federal employees not to come to work.
Hmm.
And then if the budget goes into effect and we're not under another CR, will money for those payments be included to go beyond, out to September 30th? That is a question. There is question regarding, are you giving up rights in terms of federal reemployment if you were to take that resignation? Are you giving up rights in terms of benefits that you could take with you, if you otherwise were to retire or defer retirement or things like that? There's questions about just status in general. Will you still get, the same benefits in terms of like, PTO time and things like that? Will you be earning? What about retirement contributions? What about, matching, all the 401k thing that goes into the federal government? There's a lot of rules and a lot of things that people, I would just say, need to take a breath, read, educate themselves about, and then make the decision that's right for them. I'm not saying it's not a good decision for some people. It may be for some people. I would just say that those people are probably very young, new in service, or new to service, not necessarily young, but new to service, maybe within their first 1 to 4 years at the most. And anybody else that is mid career or further, should just take a pause and educate themselves on what their status is, and learn about that, read about that, understand that, so that you can just have informed discussions, have informed decision making, about the things that are happening to federal employees as these agencies are drawing down. That's the
Yeah,
most
that's
important thing. Informed, be informed.
yeah, that makes sense. You see, when I was thinking about that email, I was like, huh, I've never worked, obviously, with the government, right? And I was thought about this email only from the perspective of someone who used to work in the private sector, right?
Yeah.
So if I would receive that kind of an email at my company, most probably my first thought would be, well, so we're, sinking ship, and I really
Yeah,
need
see ya.
to, right? It's going to be so. There are tons of other companies, and how big are my chances that in 2 months as I will start to work at the another company,
Right.
making my money and still having like getting payments from you? No.
Mhm.
See ya,
That's
exactly.
another question. If I pick up a job somewhere else, are you going to stop my payments? Or, how does this all work? When do I get what? There's a lot there. I mean, from a private industry perspective, it might seem really like, wow, you could sit at home for work and not, you get an 8 month severance package. The problem is the way the government works. It's not the president that gets to decide, how the money gets spent or what money gets spent. That's why we have the legislative branch. That's why we have checks and balances in government, because one holds the power of the purse, the other holds executive power, and the other holds, the justice, justice department, and the that branch. So it's real important that we understand who has the power to make the decisions, and we're not jumping from an uninformed place.
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, again, I do understand maybe the sentiment and idea behind that, like, to
Oh
give
yeah.
the people who would like to leave the office because of the tons amount of reasons, again, demand to get back to the office,
Oh yeah.
maybe personal not acceptance of the current political movements. Yes, you're
Right.
supposed to be apolitical, and I'm here with you, but we're still human beings, right? Maybe
Right,
you
right,
just don't want to
exactly.
work with that, and you're like, hey,
Yeah,
I want to get
right.
away, right?
Yeah,
and
there's
and
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 there is that. Yeah,
yeah, and now you have your way out, and
yeah,
not like from the perspective, like, again, without deep analysis, it looks like pretty okay-ish way out, right? You have essentially your safety net for 8 months.
mhm.
I don't know, like with or without some, again, insurance, yada yada yada, but still it's 8 months, and it looks like that within this time frame maybe you will be able to secure a job. But having in mind everything what is going on with our job and labor market,
Yeah,
I wouldn't, jump way too high and saying that, hey, I will definitely be able to secure another job in like 4 months. So I will have 4 months, for doing nothing and relax, and then 4 months is to secure another job, and I'm gonna be just fine.
right.
I mean, I'm not sure if we are there yet.
No, and that's, there are concerns with that in different regions of the country too, because the U.S., federal workforce is not all concentrated in Washington, D.C. It is throughout the United States, right? If you think of every major metropolitan area, there is typically a government presence there, a federal government presence, whether it's the General Services Administration or there's a DoD presence through an Air Force base or an Army base. So it's not concentrated in DC, where it's actually 80% of the workforce is outside of DC, and 20% sits in the DC area, so the Beltway. So when you think about that, those impacts to the local job markets are huge, can be huge, and that is definitely a concern for people to think about. And especially and it varies from people, let's just face it, age, right? There is ageism out there. So federal employees who may be older may have a harder time entering the workforce outside as a in private industry sometimes than maybe the younger half of the workforce, in terms of age. So it, hopefully merit based, but those things happen too. We see that in private sector too as well, with difficulty re-entering a workforce as an older worker
Absolutely.
sometimes. Yeah.
I've
So
just shared like I've talked with my friend, well, again, while I was preparing for this like podcast, and I was just like ping ponging ideas, and he was like, well, so what are you talking about, like merit based? Why do you want to like the completely blind system? I was like, well, there was that's the story out from my life. I've been interviewed, and like because of the couple of technical issues and etc. For quite a while, the other side, essentially the company who were interviewing me, they didn't know that I'm a woman.
yeah.
They just didn't know. And when I came to the first interview, everything went fine. So I went to the last interview, essentially with the like head of the department, and you should have seen how surprised he was to see a woman. And that was the very first time I've realized that I haven't talked to any other woman along the process.
Hmm.
Never, ever. And he decided, and like like this information being shared with me only months after I started to work in this company, that he decided to hire me and send me a contract and all of that only because that was his very last week at this company, and he just wanted to, screw them a little bit. So he
Oh,
decided that he's gonna hire a woman, as the bye bye gift. And the reason why folks were shared with me this, well, majorly because I was the one who changed the culture, like unintentionally, of the company in overall. Because within the first half a year, I started to become the most valuable worker out there. I've signed the biggest amount of the contracts, and unintentionally, I've changed the culture, and the
hmm.
narrative behind. And the folks just shared that with me, and they were like, "That's so cool that he decided to screw the company." Right? But this whole idea, right, that again, we're at the very end, we are human beings.
Right.
And if even if we're talking about merit based approach or whatsoever, the blindness by itself, the best way to solve it, right, is to create the system,
Yeah.
because the system is truly indifferent, right?
Yeah.
It's just don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are nothing the system can care about if the system hasn't been trained,
Yeah.
right, to essentially take some ideas over another. But I mean, this the whole ideas that you've shared around the fork in the road or fork you email, I mean, that was literally for me, hanging in the hat at the third hook. Think
Right.
about like whether you will be able to secure a job. Think about how exactly this will be implemented,
Right.
and if you will be sent official documents around that.
Right.
Think about all the, again, advantages you have currently, like insurance, 401k, PTOs, you name it, right? There are a
Right.
bunch of them. And also, I would imagine that you also need to take into account if you are the only provider in your family,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? Just in case if something went wrong, will you be able to recover from that?
Right.
Or you and your family simply will not be able to recover anyhow, right? And where are you gonna go?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to have ripple effects, right? So that's the thing, is that there will be ripple effects from the people who lose their jobs, their families, their buying power in our economy, their where they live. Maybe they'll have to change their location. Maybe they don't live in the same cost of living area they will live in, eventually. Maybe there's movement, migration as a result of this. There will be ripple effects, and some will come out of it fine and some will struggle. And especially I fear for some of the homes where, like, a lot of people in the Beltway are two, fed family homes. They have two federal incomes coming in, because that is the name of the game in that country, that part of the country, right? Is government. So, there are concerns there too as well. And I know people are, brushing off resumes if they think they're going to leave. What I've told everybody is to just, again, be informed, have a plan, understand what that is, be able to talk, about your situation, intelligently, understand what your rights are, know where you sit in terms of your career, and what you can and can't absorb in terms of change, and plan for that change. I see that as, we talk about resilience. You and I, when we first talked, we talked about resilience of, military spouses and military members, and having, moved a lot, and what that brings to even just hiring those members as part of the federal workforce. Um, now is the time to lean on that resilience piece if you are, one of those folks and you are impacted by this. I've talked a lot about this with my daughter, who is a Air Force spouse, in a position, who could be impacted eventually. So
Mm.
yeah, she's coming up with her plan B. She's, figuring out what they will do, during this time, and if she needs to, she's planning ahead. So
Well, yeah, and this is very important, right? To be able, again, to plan ahead, stay informed, and wait until the hat going to be like,
is on the
placed.
third hook. Yeah.
Exactly. Just come down, wait a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Until you're
Take a
gonna see.
breath.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, there are tons of FAQs, but wait until the official like documents and etc. Because it's like the reason why I brought up this topic is essentially because there is a huge pushback,
Mhm.
right? And
And there's a lot of panic around it.
oh yeah, majorly from the again emotional perspective, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. But also from time to time, you can hear like, okay, how exactly you gonna implement that?
Mhm.
And like I haven't seen, unfortunately, anywhere anywhere, and I've done my research as deep as I could, how the merit based approach will be implemented or executed.
Right. Right.
Or I haven't find, I don't know, maybe you know some dates or whatsoever, like but I couldn't find any date or like deadlines or whatsoever, that like till, and I'm just dreaming, right?
Yeah.
That till 15th of April the SBA has to come up with the POC, aka the a proof of concept idea of the scoring system to back the
Mhm.
merit based approach at the like connected to the government contracting for the small businesses.
Right.
The system going to be tested within this amount of the contractors already, for example, signed, and we will test and we will see and we will try to figure out what are the corner cases, right, as we've
Mhm.
discussed. And we're going to do this preliminary testing with the folks who would like to or who are voluntarily will agree to test the system together with us, knowing that the system is still fragile, and we will take 3 months to do that. And then we
Mhm.
will come up with the results. We will come up again transparently, I really hope so, with the all the corner cases we found and how exactly we are planning to solve them.
Right.
Therefore, till September of 2025, we will come up with the first working proposal of the system with the scoring, I don't know, board,
Yeah.
with the corner cases described, and with the opportunity to I don't know, tell us about new corner case or ask a question. If you are a procurement officer, right, that you will have your space to go to and ask question if you are in the complex situation and you do not know how to solve it.
Yeah, and in most of these, when these things change, there is a formal process that is supposed to be used, which is rulemaking. It's the rulemaking process. And, as SBA changes processes, as any agency changes processes that are impacted, usually they're predicated on an executive order or a law. This process has to, spell out transparently what the plan is, what will be done, and give ample opportunity for public comment on that process so that the public has a chance to weigh in, because it impacts the public. So the public is supposed to get a
Greatly.
chance to, yeah, it's supposed to get a chance to say something. And that is a formal process. The Federal Register is where you learn about when these things get issued. You can find out where how to make your public comments. You can set up a search on the Federal Register right now if you're interested. You can go out there and ask it to kind of ping you anytime a rule change happens under SBA and things like that, so that you can get a notification in your inbox and it'll say, hey, a rule is about ready to be published, or a proposed rule is about ready to be published. Proposed or final, they come out in a lot of different ways, but you can read about those directly there. That's the avenue that the government uses to inform the public that changes are coming. It's not usually through what we've been seeing, which is memo upon memo from different agency. It's usually
Come on, it's at
consolidated.
least readable. Those at least are readable.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to say the Federal Register notices are easy to read, because they're not. That's why people like I still have to read them and distill them down into LinkedIn posts. But it is a place to at least get the first, idea that it's out there, and then there's lots of people you can follow that can distill it down into, what does it mean really to you, and
So have
what
you
you need
seen
to know.
anything like being
No.
already popped up at the hold on, Federal Register notice, correct? That's
Yes.
the system. Okay.
Yeah, Federal Registers. So
All right.
that's and it's all digital now, but you can go out to the Federal Register and set up a search. That's what I do. I have a search out there for federal acquisition regulation changes, small business administration changes, and Department of Defense changes. And every agency uses that. I think that's where some of this feels really disjointed for people like me who've been part of this system for a long time, is that, there are um, avenues in which changes occur, right? Traditionally. And I'm going to say traditionally because we're not dealing with traditional avenues right now. And that, I think, is why it feels very chaotic. I think that's why it feels a little disjointed. I feel that if some of these changes were funneling through the traditional methods of just, hey, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're planning on doing it, we would have more, maybe, structure around it, so that it's easier to understand that, okay, this is going to impact all of government, or this only impacts this agency, or this impacts, you know procurement versus, loans, or something like that. There would be a little more structure around the actual, you know impacts, that we could then say, okay, this impact doesn't really mean a whole lot, it's this or this, or this impact is going to have a great impact, and here's where it is, or this is something that we think there, has merit, and maybe, this is something with change, this is a good thing, or maybe this is something that, wow, did they consider these other areas, the public needs to comment on those things. That's what that whole Federal Register avenue is meant to do.
But
So,
also, I mean, I would imagine that if everybody was trying to, go through the, again, those typical or existing avenues, most probably they would stuck as everybody else before
well,
had.
yeah, it's
I
it's a
mean,
time
there is
consuming
tons of.
process.
That's
Yeah.
not even about that, because, like, the system by itself, and that's the rule of the system from the
Hmm.
engineering, right? The
Hmm.
system by itself has the only purpose. stay at this stance it always has been. And if
Hmm.
you're trying to change the stance, the
Oh, I
system will
agree.
push you back as hard as it can, because like, how the hell, like, what do you want from me? Just
Well, yeah. So all
shush.
this, right. So all these memos being issued the way they are, I mean, the executive orders aren't even numbered, right? Normally, executive orders are numbered. The fact that they're not even numbered, they're hard to track because you have to know the title and you have to know what they say to track them. I feel it's by design. It is by design. It is to prevent the pushback. It is to
In a
prevent.
way, most
Yeah,
probably, yeah.
yeah, I would say most probably, yeah, because we didn't see this under the first version of this administration in 2017. There were numbered executive orders. There were executive orders that were done. There were rules that were reviewed. There were things that were pulled back. I mean, that happened under the first version of this administration. So none of that, and it happens under every administration that things get reviewed and things get done like this. I think it's just I think it again is the what I feel is a either an they don't want to acknowledge that there is a system to allow people to have that say in government that has traditionally been there, or that it's just maybe people aren't familiar with it and we're trying to run government like a business, which is taking breaking some of those traditions and trying something new. Like you said, somebody hired you to try and break tradition, right, and break their company, and it didn't work. So that's what part of staying,
Well, I mean,
me for
in
me
their
anyway,
case
is
it
following
worked
these things. Yeah. Well, it worked to
unintentionally.
good. Yeah, it worked unintentionally well. Yeah. So yeah, so it's to me it's just, for me it's following and trying to keep the noise out of it, the emotion, like you said. It's yes, at first there's what are they doing? And then it's okay, let's read it, let's distill it down, let's see what it means. What do the words really mean? Do we know what the words really mean yet? If we don't, then we need to wait and see what these words start to mean, and what the interpretation is, and where that reach starts to go, before we get really concerned about the impacts of that reach. There will be impacts, but we need to see what they are. And you know again, take a breath, take a pause, and wait for some answers on some of these things, because we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm still trying to find some time, to be totally honest.
To read all of them.
Not all of them, no. The current administration, especially folks from Doge and anyhow connected to the like tech community, they're keep they're continuing to share the fact that the inspiration they are taking from the Clinton Gore administration, and their push toward the cutting government spending and the size of government and all of
Mhm.
that, and pulling the
Well,
country out of the inflationary movement.
yeah, well, I was around during Clinton and Gore, and they
Give
didn't
me
do it
more.
this way. They didn't do it this way. They didn't do it this way. I mean, I've told a few people this is like, under Clinton and Gore, we did see cuts. We saw hiring freezes. We saw deep hiring freezes. We saw military installations be changed through, base realignment and closure act, right? So a lot of bases shut down. People were shifted all over the country. Our military was, I mean, one of the jobs I had was in stationing over in Europe, and it was talking about what military bases are going to stay in Germany and which ones we're going to move, and what were we going to do with the troops when we moved them between stations, and could this station handle housing, and could this station handle dining, and could all that. Those are strategic decisions that happen. That was one of my first jobs in government. Um, we saw this before, but it was not done this way. When hiring freezes happened before, people got it was handled through a legal process called reduction in force. And a reduction in force is simply where the government says you're not going to have this budget, you need to make cuts of a certain percent, and they tell the agencies, go forth and make those cuts. Make them where it makes sense for your agency, the mission you have, what you still have to support, and the budget that we're giving you. And hiring stopped. We didn't hire. And some offices went through this reduction in force where it's kind of like getting a pink slip. You get laid off, you get scored based on your seniority, your performance, there's a combination of scores that occur to run a RIF. And then anybody that falls below a certain score is out. um, related to your position. And sometimes it was based on how your position was funded, what type of money funded your position. If you worked on a military projects, you were military funded. If you worked on civil works projects like dams and rivers and stuff, you were civil funded. And sometimes only civil got cut and military didn't. Those types of things. All these things come into play.
Hmm.
And then when those people were reduced, let's say you were part of the reduction in force, you lost your job. If you had status or tenure as a career employee, you were put on what was called a priority placement list. And then you had, should future openings come up, you had first right of refusal for an opening. And you got to choose your geographic location, and you got to choose where you were interested in accepting those offers from. The wider your geographic location, the more offers you would likely get to get a job faster. And many found jobs before their RIF ever even took effect. In terms of their final pay. So many were moving and changing jobs and going throughout the country. I know in Sacramento we lost an Air Force base. Uh, I can't even remember the name of it now. Sorry, I'm having a brain cramp. But we lost an Air Force base, and a lot of those people went to Ohio. So, if they wanted to keep their jobs, if they didn't, they looked for jobs in the local area. If they got one, great. If they didn't, sometimes they waited for the next federal job to open up. They were on a list, maybe selected, maybe not. Keep waiting, right? And those lists, are good for so many years. Those priority placement lists are good for so many years. That's how it happened before, and it was very effective. And that's how Clinton and Gore got within a budget that was, where we weren't spending more than we were taking in. That's how they balanced the budget. And it was very orderly, and it was no, there was some chaos. There was a lot of emotion at the time too, but people weren't getting an email saying you can not work for 8 months and still get paid. There was nothing like that. Um, and
And
I
how about
remember
contracting? They've done some
con,
cutting
con,
in the contracting as
yeah,
well.
contracting was cut too. I mean, contractors, some contractors that used to be support for the government that actually would sit side by side with government personnel were cut. Some contracts were downsized. Some services that we had gotten in the past, we didn't have the money all in, let's say, 5-year chunks anymore. We got it in a 1-year chunk or a 2-year chunk. That type of thing. Yeah, services were also taken down. And around that time frame, I want to say it's like mid 2000s. Then the government started to see that the civilian workforce really hadn't grown very much. The federal workforce had not grown very much. The federal employees, but the contractor support workforce that was assisting government had grown quite a bit in the services area. So there became then this reporting called Service Contract Act reporting, where contractors around 2006 to 2008, I can't remember the year exactly, I know it was around that time frame, that contractors now had to support and the government had to report also the numbers of contractors they were hiring to help support the federal workforce, because they didn't have a large enough federal workforce to do everything. So we were contracting out a lot of these services, and that has grown quite a bit over the years. And that reporting still is required. It's in the sam.gov website, where Service Contract Act reporting occurs, and contractors have to report. So, it was totally doable. It did bring us down. It did get us within a balanced budget for many years, and we had a surplus when Clinton left office. So it can be done without the chaos we are seeing now, in an orderly legal process where it can occur and employees' rights are still protected, and we're still getting to the cuts and the levels of the cuts we need. So I think that's part of, since I've seen that over my lifetime, as a Fed, I think that's part of where I come from, a little bit being frustrated with what we're seeing now, because I do know that there is a way to do it. I've seen it done. I was in that process. I was one of those people who was an intern at the time, wondering, am I going to get cut because I'm so new? I better have enough savings. Where can I get another job? I'm a single mom with 2 kids. How am I going to handle this? So I understand the emotion that goes on behind that, but I did see it done and done successfully.
Okay, yeah, I still really need to do my research because I feel like I cannot, comment in any way because I simply I lack the information
Yeah,
and
yeah. Read back on it. It's pretty interesting. That's
oh
why
yeah.
when this all started, I kept telling people, oh, they'll just run a riff. They'll just do that. No, they got an email saying, go tomorrow and you can work, you get paid for 8 months. It was like, Yeah, but they could just run a riff. I don't understand why we're not doing it the other way. But, shock and all value, I guess, is some
Well,
of
yeah,
this
but
too,
we're gonna
right?
see. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I would
Yeah.
imagine that we will see how this everything,
Yeah.
will go further. So, getting back to the very beginning of our conversation, you told me that you do love what you're doing because of the creativity.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that there was tons of subcontracting and everything, and still over there in fields to help essentially the federal agencies to handle their job.
Yeah.
And I'm software engineer, so now let's like put everything into one hat. And my question would be, I would really imagine that if there are not already existing tons of the AI based tooling, which might help you to deal with tons of work and replace all this subcontracting. Are there any like AI tooling for the, I don't know, gov contracts to get into, to break into the system, which can help you? And what is your gut feeling? Will we be able to essentially, I'm not a believer in replacement. I don't think that we will be able ever came up with the good enough AI system which will replace human brain and
Hmm.
replace humanity and emotions inside of us. It doesn't really matter whether we like it or not. We are who we are.
Right.
Uh, but I tend to believe that we still can reduce significantly amount of time and effort we have to spend to go through the documents, to check them, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And simplify the system.
Yeah. 100%. There's room for
So
improvement.
yeah, and I'm wondering again if you're already maybe working with some systems, maybe AI based systems, or maybe you're consulting, um, which are helping with the government contracting. So small businesses could at least start to test them and check it out if it's helpful for them.
Yeah, so there's a couple of systems that I know. On my website, I have a page called support providers, and so I have some of them listed there. But there are AI tools out there right now. So when I talk about like finding out who your competitors are and who's in the market, there are tools right now at very reasonable price points where you can find this information. It will go through and it will parse thousands and thousands of data points down into like who has gotten the recent awards and how many did they get and what location did they get them in. SBA even has its own site, specifically just for small businesses. It's called the SBA Subnet, and that's one. And then the SBA Data Hub is the one that actually shows the award data. The subnet shows you like maybe some opportunities specifically for subcontractors, but the SBA Data Hub, Small Business Data Hub, you can go out there now and type in, your zip code and your NAICS code, your business code there for your industry. And you can see who's received the top 10 awards of small businesses in your area. There's a map. You can click on the map to see who's gotten it by congressional district, things like that. So there's lots of easy ways to find, kind of who the competition pool is. There's other AI tools that go through and dig through sam.gov for things that are, similar keywords and things so that you can find opportunities, find historical award data, things like that. So one of those I like is HireGov. It's really good, I think. And some of these also then have some components that go through and match match as well, like maybe the outline for starting to write a proposal and help you from that perspective. Maybe take a solicitation document that it's telling you is available. You push a button, it'll help you break out an outline of what you need to submit. So at least I have a starting point. Those are great tools for small businesses to start using. In entry points into the government and understanding how to read some of these documents, where the most important pieces of information are in these documents to try and get um, to so that you can make a wise decision in terms of a go no go going after a procurement. I think for government, I think we need, anything we can get that helps us write some of these things better so that we can get more plain language into the writing of our documents so that we're not having to help contractors decipher a lot of gobbledygook government ease that is out there that is frustrating even for government people to sit here and try and sort through it many times. It's not always easy to interpret that either. And there are some things out there which I think the government is working on and testing. I don't have particulars on it. I just know that they are. And there's a lot of AI companies who I've talked to who are very interested in making sure that small businesses have a place at the table for trying to have readily available tools that help them in areas where they need help in getting into the federal marketplace, like proposal writing, understanding opportunities, things like that. And they're very cognizant of the fact that they need to be at a price point that small businesses can afford, so they don't get left behind in the AI push in innovation. And I've had several meetings with people like that. And I actually created kind of a guide checklist for small businesses to go through and think about. Are you ready to use these tools? Have you thought about how you're going to use them and how to target your search for these tools so that you're getting things that actually are helpful to you? You're not paying for something that you don't ever use, or isn't going to give you the information or the help that you need and the support you need.
Right, but that solves only like one side of the equation, right? The
Hmm.
part or the side connected to the small businesses, but we are still are like left behind a little bit with
Yeah,
the like procurement and like SBA side. I'm not saying that they are not trying to improve. I'm sure they are, that everybody are doing the best they can at the places they are at the moment,
yeah,
right? But
yeah,
I'm really really interested in what's going to be the real again implementation of the promises, to make it a little bit more transparent and spit it
yeah,
up. Because again, I tend to believe that it's not solely or only about the you know speed of the movement, but also about the transparency.
yeah. I'm 100% on the transparency needs to be there. I think that if you have the transparency, then you can at least understand what you're working with and what's working for you and working against you in a process. But without that, you don't. It's blind, and it's frustrating. A lot of companies come to me after being, through these processes and feel like they don't know anything more because nobody has shared. It's not transparent. It's, difficult to navigate. They're not getting answers, that type of thing from people.
Yeah, but
And
also a lot of frustration, like why
oh
have
yeah,
I lost it, like the hell,
right.
like why you
Yeah.
won and I haven't. But when
Yeah.
you're seeing, it doesn't mean that you won't be frustrated. Of course you will.
Oh
if
yeah.
if you wanted to secure that contract, you've done your best, you've spent tons of like resources in all meaning of the word to put your
Hmm.
proposal together, and you haven't secured that contract. Of course you're going to be frustrated.
Yeah.
But if you have very clear and transparent answer and comparison and explanation why you haven't secured that contract, that
Yeah.
is the pain a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
it is. And that one of the things that, businesses need to remember, if you're not getting that feedback, is, you can ask for that feedback. You can ask the government for, there's formal debriefings, right? Where on certain contracts they are required to give you feedback on what was good about your proposal, what was not good about it, where they, saw weaknesses and deficiencies and things like that. But for even the ones where they're not required to, it never hurts to ask the contracting officer, ask the procurement person, can you have a sit down with me and just talk to me about my last proposal and explain to me where you saw I could have some improvement? I mean, there's never anything that prevents you from doing that. So always try to take advantage of that.
Okay, that's
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean, I would sit in my office many times with small businesses who'd say, "Hey, do you have time for a cup of coffee? Can we go over my last proposal that I submitted like 2 months ago? We're past the procurement phase. I can talk about things." And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm happy to sit down and say, maybe you didn't answer the question here, or, you gave me information here that wasn't what I asked for. Read the questions. You always want to make sure you're not trying to sell yourself so much that you forget to answer the government's questions they have about what they are trying to get to, which is where I see small businesses sometimes overcompensate. They're so interested in selling and telling people about themselves that they sometimes miss what the government is asking them really to answer. I recently reviewed a proposal that was somebody gave me to look at and said, "Tell me, compared to the solicitation, what I did wrong." We didn't win. It was a very simple solicitation, asked for a few, four simple things, and this small business submitted 64 pages. That's overkill. That's probably the most extreme example I can tell you that I've seen recently of that. But that is an example. So,
I got it. I do
yeah,
remember when I was participating in one of the accelerators, and the folks, on the venture capitalist side, like they were picking startup founders like just randomly, and they were asking, okay, so what's your revenue? And you got it. Well, you see, we have the huge TAM and we have this huge opportunities and coverage. Yeah, but what's your revenue? And also we are have this huge yada
yeah.
yada yada. Okay, but what's your revenue?
Think Shark Tank. That's what I tell people is if you've seen the show Shark Tank, think about it. I mean, get to the point, right? It's
Right.
get to the point.
You do not have that much of a time, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and that's okay to say I do not have revenue, or my revenue at the moment
right.
is $0.
Or I have no performance. I have no past performance.
Yeah, I have no past performance, but here
Yeah,
are the documents which are showing that I am clearly capable to provide the value you are looking for, right?
right.
And provide very clear answer to these questions. Because let's be honest, if you have no previous experience, if you have no revenue, you cannot hide this needle.
No, no. Well, it's very apparent, but it's not always a bad thing, right? It's you got to start somewhere. And that's why I always tell people subcontracting is a good way to start because, that gets you experience. It gets you maybe not the experience of the big guy, but it gets you a piece of experience. And pieces of that experience matter. They do matter. So, yeah, that shows that it's less risky. No experience, risk. Government, risk averse, right? So that's why it's like you say, it's the one you won't, it's hard to get past.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for this conversation. We are almost up to our 2 hours conversation. Oh my god! And I could like continue to talk to you for at least a couple of hours. But at first, I need to educate myself because I'm really interested in how exactly Clinton Gore administration had pulled this up and they made it happen in a way,
Yeah.
right? Not
Yeah.
necessarily fully, but again, I'm really
Right.
interested in seeing how the government can go through the complex processes because cutting cannot be easy,
No,
right?
it's not.
It's always going to be painful. There are going to be
Right.
tons of ripple effects, but we have this historical essentially data. We
Hmm.
have data how they at least try to execute everything and manage everything, and we do have the data about ripples on the water and some good and bad things
Hmm.
which were happening afterwards. So that's why I'm gonna need to just go back into my cave and just sit there for a couple weeks, I would imagine, and just go through all the documents and yeah, trying to cipher it. Because oh my god, going through the executive orders, even through the executive order by the god LBJ, I was
Yeah.
suffering. Like,
Yeah.
can you please just put it in a simple language? It's just like, what,
Yeah.
what are you trying? Because the first time I went through it, I was like, so why are you gonna need to revoke it? There is nothing bad in this executive order, and I do most probably understand the historical, base ground behind of it, the movement around the Martin Luther King and
Yeah.
the movement around like women rights, right? And like the
Hmm.
historical movement and the
Yeah.
idea that it was first proposed by GFK and all of that. So you do understand like why it has been put on the table, and the idea that you cannot segregate, you cannot discriminate. There was like, well, that's good ideas. Like why you would revoke it? And then I started to read about the fact these only two words, affirmative action, were turned into something different, most probably because someone believes so. So I'm still trying to figure out what happened over there. Don't get me wrong. I'm still
Yeah.
trying to figure out, and most probably, I won't be able to come up with something because I'm here. Like I'm here with you. It feels like it's intentionally
Yeah.
made very complex and like that you can read it in a way you want it to.
Yeah, and I think that's the strange part of this is that everybody has taken it kind of beyond. I think, every time we write a rule, we talk about the intent behind the rule. And so, when I would sit in far writing meetings, we would talk about what is the intent of the whatever the action was that initiated this rule, the law, the executive order. And we wrote with that intent in mind, not trying to stretch beyond that intent, just to the intent of the words. And then interpretation is up to others, right? Law and other people. So that's where I think people have taken it beyond intent and into interpretation, and then saying interpretation is law. Now, yes, that happens because we have court decisions and we have case law and all these other things, but I think that's where kind of things are getting blurred, right, in the whole discussion, and that makes it complex because everybody's kind of interpretation is a little different, and what the law's interpretation is not maybe what the administration's interpretation is, and vice versa. I mean, it's all over the place right now. So yeah, it's
But
that's
you
the
can
hard part of
talk
trying to
about
link
that.
all this together. Yeah, that's
But
the hard part.
absolutely, but the fact that you can talk about that,
Yeah.
that what honestly it still strikes me like was wow. Just to give you the example of what I'm talking about, I was just recently watching with my husband these dope sick TV series about the OxyContin um,
Oh.
history, right? And before that, we were looking the dark waters about DuPont and Tefal and
Yeah.
all of that. And he was like, "Oh my God, I hate this country! Like, what is happening? How on earth we will love to make that happen?" I was like, "The fact that you know about that, the fact that the Purdue
Right.
Pharma and Sackler's family
Yes.
and DuPont were brought and well, okay, DuPont weren't killed, but Sackler's and Purdue Pharma were killed by the folks from the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
right? Who brought up that case, who continue pursuing what they've seen as right. And no
Right.
matter how hard the pushback was from all the parts and sides, they continue to do that.
Yeah.
And now you know about it. The
Right.
fact that you know about it,
Yeah.
it's incredible. I'm sure as hell that something very similar is happening right here, right now in China. But they
Yeah.
would never know about that. And we would never know about that. And they would
Right.
never even be able to speak up at loud
Yeah.
about something like that. Because how many like incredible amount of very dark things were happening in Soviet Union,
Mhm.
and you just couldn't speak up about them.
Right.
If you
Right.
would dare, well, imagine what, like, the next dark thing gonna happen to whom, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And the fact that we can speak about that, the fact that we can have this kind of open conversation, it's still so incredibly great and important for me that maybe,
Yes.
that's yet another reason why I'm so into this whole, well, not podcasting thing, but rather conversation. Because
Yeah.
in my world, I can spend, quite legitly, the week or two going through the historical data legislation, yada, 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 yada,
Right.
essentially being nerd and bookworm, which I love. And
Me too.
then I can bring tons of the questions to someone who can address them,
Yeah.
right? What might be better than that? I don't know.
Yeah. That's nothing. That sounds like fun to me.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, and I'm truly looking forward our next conversation, part 2,
Yeah.
maybe 3. because
Yeah.
I'm sure that the current administration will give us tons of topics to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure they will. I'm sure
Uh,
they will.
all right,
Thanks.
let me stop the